Hello everyone and welcome to the latest edition of This Racing Life on the eve of the Moet and Chandon July Festival 2018. And during the three-day meeting, no fewer than 4 races will be sponsored by the EBF, one of Britain's main sponsors. And I'm here at HQ to learn a little bit more about the organisation.
EBF Chairman Philip Freedman guides us through the history of the EBF, from its inception in the early 1980s right up to the present. CEO Kerry Murphy reveals the mechanics behind the fundraising and prize money distribution. We travel to Dalham Hall Stud to meet British EBF trustee and Darley Director of Stallions Sam Bullard to get a breeder's view. We talk to Michael Prosser on the eve of the July Festival, where the EBF sponsor no less than 4 races to understand the importance of the EBF to race planning and ultimately the safeguarding of the breed. Philip Freedman has been involved with racehorse breeding for as long as he can remember. His family's Cliveden stud bred classic winners Polygamy and Reference Point, so it was a natural progression for Philip to one day become the chairman of the EBF, a role he has held since January 2017. I began by asking Philip to tell us a bit more about the history and origins of this great organisation based here in the heart of Newmarket.
It came about in 1982 and was the idea of breeders as a way of supporting prize money. And the reason you see it in so many races, it particularly focuses on maidens. That was because at that time, when we were faced with prize money cuts, the levy board decided that because 2-year-old maidens in particular were the least levy generative sort of races, that they didn't wish to continue funding them centrally. And therefore, if they were going to have prize money, it was breeders who were going to be forced to pay for them effectively.
How easy was it back then to get the idea off the ground? Were there people that perhaps had a different view and didn't think it was necessarily the right way to go?
There certainly was. I mean, in particular, the Hislops and Brigadier Gerard. I mean, Brigadier Gerard was actually never put in the EBF. And my father at the time was on the Brigadier Gerard syndicate. And that was, I think, always a fairly acrimonious syndicate. But one of the syndicate members, I think, tried to pay the EBF subscription on behalf of the whole horse, and this caused even more problems. And it really was, in a way, Brigadier Gerard staying out of the EBF was perhaps a good thing for the EBF because it highlighted exactly why stallions should be in it. I mean, my father at the time also, he had a filly, Evergenial, who Henry Cecil trained and thought a lot of. And first time out, we were struggling to find a maiden to run her in because obviously she wasn't EBF eligible, and all the sort of nice maidens you would have wanted to run in were EBF restricted. And she went to Brighton, and I think won a maiden by 7 lengths, and next time out won the May Hill. But it just highlighted the problems you would have if you had a stallion that wasn't in the scheme.
In the early years, how easily did EBF maidens, for example, fit into the framework of racing at the time?
Well, I don't think they weren't new races. All that happened was that the existing maidens had EBF conditions attached. And the effect of them being EBF races is that they are restricted to the progeny either of stallions that are in the EBF or where, if they were sired overseas, where the owner or breeder has paid $600 to put them in the scheme.
How did you see it back then? Could you have imagined it would be where it is now with 100 million euros plus, ploughed back into European racing? I
mean, I don't know what the long-term plan was back then of the original trustees who set it up, but I would doubt they would have envisaged that it would still be going nearly 40 years on and have put so much into racing. I think they would have seen it probably as a short-term solution to a very specific problem, rather than something which has become a fundamental part of the racing scene.
Kerry Murphy has been the chief executive of the European Breeders' Fund since 2012, and I asked her to explain the mechanics behind the organisation, in particular the fundraising and distribution of prize money.
The biggest change is that the EBF's had to almost keep pace with the increase in quality in the stallion standing in Europe. Every member country's fund has increased year on year in the last few years, and we're very lucky that we've got more money coming in, but that means we have to keep pace with paying that money out in an appropriate and imaginative way. There are EBF races throughout Europe pretty much every day of the year, and it can be anywhere from Britain, Ireland, France, Germany to the Czech Republic. So we are covering a broad spectrum of races across a lot of the countries in Europe, and people perhaps don't quite realise that those letters that are actually held within the conditions of the race. So in other words, if you see EBF in the race title, it means it's confined to EBF eligibles. But actually, it generally means we're putting money into the prize money, so the TPF is higher because we've contributed to it. So essentially, the EBF pulls in stallion owners' money and we have to pay it out.
Rachel Gowland is the Marketing and Communications Manager at the British EBF, and part of her role involves ensuring that the breeding industry understands the key part the EBF has to play in the funding of our sport.
You have to remember it's a voluntary scheme for stallion owners to pay into, so we have to be able to justify to them where their money's going and that it's being invested correctly. And we also have a responsibility to educate people in the industry about where our money comes from, and that people who may sponsor races to a large extent in their own right also provide funding for prize money and racing through the EBF. You know, everybody knows that there are pressures on businesses as they grow and you know, going into periods of maybe economic instability in the future. So we have to make sure that we've got a good product and that the lines of communication are open so everybody knows who we are, what we do, and are comfortable with how we're spending specifically our stakeholders' money.
Sam Bullard is the Director of Stallions at the all-powerful Darley Studs. We paid him a visit at Dalham Hall Stud to discuss his role on the British EBF's Board of Trustees and to get an insight into a major breeder's perspective on the EBF.
I'm on there really as representing one of the organisations that generates a lot of money for the European Breeders' Fund. And I think the stallion farms wanted to have a bit of say in how that money was spent. And so I hope I'm representing, along with Simon Mockridge, the stallion farms in how we proportion the money. I mean, the executive of the EBF run it very efficiently. It's very clear what is expected to be contributed by each stallion, depending on how many mares any one stallion covers. And they do a fantastic job in Lushington House. And I think as far as Darley is concerned, we're happy with the contribution and the amount of the contribution, and it is a very, very good relationship. And of course, if it helps breeders make breeding a financial viability, then at the end of the day, that's going to help racing and it's going to help us.
And it is obviously the European Breeders' Fund, and you said you represent the British part, but is Darley represented throughout Europe, from France, from Ireland, and of course from Britain?
Yes, no, wherever we stand stallions, we contribute to the EBF. Darley contributes to the EBF, and indeed some of our American stallions contribute as well if they're likely to have runners in Europe.
We still have the restriction in place on the EBF maidens, because without that you wouldn't be able to effectively compel stallion owners to put their stallions into the scheme. But the spread of races we cover is now much wider. In particular, there's been an emphasis on supporting fillies races, and that's because we are a breeders' scheme, and we've got to be responsive to the requirements of A, the stallion owners who fund it, but B, the breeders who we're looking, we need these races to be won by horses that will be retained in Britain, retained in Europe, to go to stud here and be the broodmares of the future.
Each jurisdiction run their own prize fund. So although they all adhere to the EBF agreement and there are certain criteria that they all have to meet, each country designs and appropriates its own fund spend. So they react to whatever's needed in that particular country. And we meet a few times a year just to bounce ideas around and report in on what they're all doing. And if there's any changes and challenges, that whether it be in France or Ireland, Britain or Germany, there's all raised at that meeting, and they all kind of bounce ideas around and help each other out.
The bulk of the racing is in Britain, Ireland and France. I mean, Germany is also a member, and we sponsor a handful of races in Spain and Czechoslovakia. Italy has been a member, but there have been problems with Italy's participation because under their current racing authority, which is effectively government run, they've said that you cannot have the EBF restriction. So what happens in Italy is that horses run in ordinary maidens. If they're by an EBF stallion, they may get a premium, but they don't have EBF races as such.
I saw back in 2012 that I think it was 100 million euros that had been reinvested by the EBF over, 27 or so years, so less than 3 decades, which is fantastic. Year on year, as we are now in 2018, how much is reinvested Europe-wide?
It averages out about 5 million euros a year. So we pull in, each stallion fund pulls in their own money. We then have the international stallion registration money and the nominations money, which at the moment amounts to about $1.4 million a year, and that gets split amongst the member countries. And we use a mechanism for, depending on how many runners they've got in each country, they all get a split of that pool, and they then put that into prize money as well.
How strong are the ties with the EBF in the sort of fabric of British racing now, with tie-ups with the Jockey Club and of course recently with Arena Racing? How strong is the EBF's sort of standing in racing?
We work in a really collaborative way, so whether it be with HRI, with the BHA and race planning, whether it be with France Gallo, the French EBF is actually operated out of France Gallo, and in Germany the Directorium actually operate the German EBF. In Ireland, they sit down with HRI and organise the prize money spend there. And we work, as I say, very closely with BHA and race planning, and we have links with the TBA, so we have representatives from breeders on the boards. So it's really central to our being that we make sure that we communicate with all those various bodies and ultimately get our job done.
From the British EBF's point of view, we've worked very hard in the last year to make sure that our presence in the industry is more visible. So that's why we established a partnership with the Jockey Club racecourses, which has been very successful and helped us get out to the individual courses a bit more and explain to them, the executives and the directors, exactly what we do. We've done the same with Arena Racing, and we're also working on partnerships with Racing to School and Racing Welfare. So it's about us being a bit more integrated into the industry than we previously have been. And every bit of that we do, we add value through the projects that we do, but we also get that bit of visibility in return, and that helps us to reinforce the central message that we are a voluntary industry self-help mechanism.
Have you found that people, for example, will see the letters EBF, they know what they are, but when asked the question, they don't necessarily know what they mean and what they actually do?
Well, I was at Haydock a few years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, where we sponsored a race jointly with Neil Westbrook. And Neil was an owner and a breeder. And when it came to the trophy presentation, he grabbed the microphone and said, "I'd just like you all to know that the EBF is the only good thing ever to have come out of Europe." I mean, it was, I think that, I suppose, showed his sort of political views, but also was a misunderstanding of what the EBF is, because we're very much an industry organisation. We've never received funds from Brussels or anywhere else.
The EBF are once again the proud sponsors of no less than 4 races throughout the 3-day Moet and Chandon Newmarket July Festival. And I wanted to find out from Michael Prosser the esteem in which he holds the work of the EBF in helping him with both race planning and much needed injections of prize money.
It's hugely important for all British racecourses. I mean, in particular Newmarket. We have £243,000 of support from the EBF this year across a whole raft and plethora of races. Of course, we have 39 race days, starting in April and finishing in November. And we provide a wide range of opportunities, the sorts of races that the EBF, the BHA and Jockey Club racecourses wish to support, ranging from maiden races, novices, graduation races such as conditions races, to listed juvenile contests or older horse fillies and mares listed races, and most importantly a whole raft of fillies handicaps. And I suspect that without EBF support and their significant support for these races, A, we wouldn't be running these races at the prize money levels that they're at, which is significantly above minimum value, or alternatively some racecourses wouldn't stage them. It is our culture, it is our belief that we should work with the EBF and the BHA to stage races that promote horses, bring them forward, bring them through the ranks, and therefore we will frame the races of those types, in particular in the last couple of years. Stallion and dam restricted races. There's one race that a new race, only 2 years old, that we stage on October the 24th this year, and within 2 years of it being staged, Cracksman won that contest in its first running, beating a horse called Stradivarius in fourth. And last year, Night to Behold, of course, the Lingfield Derby trial winner. So it just shows the importance of those races.
Are you looking to advance with perhaps just different types of races altogether? Is there anything else that you look to do which isn't already in the calendar?
Absolutely. So a horse naturally should be running in a maiden and novice, then progressing probably in a conditions race or a graduation race of that type before potentially going into a listed contest. But at all levels as well. So the handicaps, the fillies handicaps that we'll be staging, 3s, 2s, and running in significant sort of prize funds. Those fillies and mares handicap finals on the 6th of October are worth £50,000 each. The Jersey Lily, which is a match funded nursery handicap, 7 furlongs at the Cambridgeshire meeting, it's a £50,000 contest. These are significant purse funds, and I can absolutely promise you that without the EBF support, they would not be run at those levels.
In EBF races specifically, which ones would stand out for you?
Well, as you say, I've been here a while now. I started here on February the 7th, 2001, so I've seen a fair few contests and some unbelievably high quality horses running. I'm very spoiled. But there is a race that springs to mind, EBF supported race. It's one of the first mile juvenile contests in the calendar every single year in second to third week of August. And in 2010, a horse called Frankel, a sort of Leicester racecourse for the first time, and took on another horse that was having his first run called Nathaniel. So it was a pretty exceptional, it was an absolutely foul evening. But who would have known at that point in time that Frankel would beat Nathaniel in that mile maiden? That was exceptional. They were amazing racehorses, and now they're proving themselves to be amazing stallions.
From your role here at Newmarket and your relationship with the EBF, how do you see it developing over the next few years?
I see us working together.
Yep.
I see us being creative in our thinking, looking at new ideas, making sure that we're supporting the staying race programme, sire and dam restricted races, where can we best fit, how can we modify race conditions to ensure that we are doing everything we can to further the breed and to further British and European racing.
Well, there's something important as well to say that we offer the top quality racing, but we offer the prize money to match.
Absolutely. I think that's a really key point to note in all of this, that without the EBF support, there'll be a lot more races run at minimum value. Working with the EBF, we are running these races significantly in advance of the BHA minimum values. Their support is critical to achieving that.